Picture this for a moment. It's December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. Snow falls across the Ardennes forest as German Panzer divisions punch through American lines. For 3 days, the Wehrmacht has been advancing, confident that winter weather has grounded Allied air power. Victory seems within reach. Then something happens that no German commander had ever witnessed before. The sky erupts, not sequentially, not in waves, but all at once. 20 American artillery pieces, some miles apart, fire at precisely calculated moments. Every shell, travelling different distances at different velocities, arrives at the exact same second. The impact is devastating, and in the command post of the Sixth SS Panzer Army, a German general stares at the radio reports coming in and mutters words that would echo through military history. This isn't war. This is something else entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What those German officers had just witnessed wasn't simply superior firepower. It was the result of an American innovation that had revolutionized artillery warfare, a system so sophisticated that no other army in the world could replicate it. It was called Time on Target, or TOT, and it was powered by something the Germans never saw coming: American artillery computers. This is the story of how American ingenuity turned the ancient art of artillery into a devastating science, and why German generals realized, perhaps too late, that they were fighting an enemy whose industrial and technological capabilities had fundamentally changed the nature of modern warfare. To understand why the German generals were so shocked, we need to understand the fundamental problem that artillery had faced since gunpowder was invented. When you fire an artillery piece at a target you cannot see, which is miles away, you're solving one of Taulis, the most complex mathematical problems in warfare. You need to account for wind speed and direction, air temperature and pressure, the rotation of the earth, the difference in elevation between your gun and the target, how worn your barrel is, the temperature of your propellant, and dozens of other variables. And you need to calculate this quickly, in the middle of a battle, often under enemy fire. For centuries, this was done through a combination of mathematical tables, slide rules, and experienced gunners who developed an almost intuitive sense for trajectory. But it was slow, it was prone to human error, and most critically, it made coordinating fire from multiple batteries almost impossible. In World War I, when British artillery prepared a barrage, they would fire gun by gun, battery by battery, creating a rolling thunder that announced to every enemy soldier, "Take cover, shells are coming." By the time the barrage reached its peak, the enemy had already sought shelter in bunkers and trenches. Casualties, while horrific, were far less than they could have been. The US Army studied this problem extensively after World War I, and what they discovered changed everything. Research showed that an artillery barrage produces the most casualties in the first few seconds before the enemy can react. In those initial moments, soldiers are in the open, standing, moving, completely exposed. But within 2 seconds of the first shell impact, soldiers drop to the ground. Within 8 seconds, everyone has found cover. The window of maximum lethality is incredibly brief, so the question became, how do you maximize the destruction in those first crucial seconds? The answer was simultaneously simple and incredibly complex. Make all the shells arrive at exactly the same time. In the early 1930 seconds, at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, something revolutionary was happening. The Field Artillery School, under the direction of Carlos Brewer and his team of instructors, was completely reimagining how artillery worked. They abandoned the old system, where each battery calculated its own firing solutions independently. Instead, they created something called a Fire Direction Center, or FDC. This was a centralized command post that could control multiple batteries simultaneously, treating dozens of guns as a single coordinated weapon system. Here's how it worked. Forward observers, positioned with the infantry or flying in small Piper Cub spotter planes, would identify targets and radio their coordinates back to the FDC. The FDC, equipped with firing charts, survey data, and mathematical tables, would calculate the precise firing solution for each gun. But here's the genius part. They didn't just calculate where to aim, they calculated when to fire. Because different guns were at different distances from the target, shells fired simultaneously would arrive at different times. A howitzer 2 miles from the target would get its shells there much faster than a gun 7 miles away. So the FDC would work backwards from a designated time on target, calculating exactly when each gun needed to fire so that all the shells would arrive simultaneously. They tested this system in the spring of 1931, and it worked perfectly. Multiple batteries, spread across the landscape, firing at carefully staggered times, all their shells converging on a single point at the exact same instant. By the time America entered World War II, the Fire Direction Center system had been refined into the most sophisticated artillery coordination system in the world. What made American artillery so effective wasn't just the Fire Direction Center concept, it was the technology that supported it. And this is where the term artillery computers comes in, though we need to understand what that meant in 1944. These weren't electronic computers in the modern sense. They were mechanical calculating devices, slide rules, and most importantly, specialized firing tables that had been computed, using early electronic calculating machines back in the United States. But in terms of capability, they were revolutionary. American forward observers were equipped with reliable FM radios, a technology the Germans were only beginning to deploy by 1944. These radios allowed instant communication from the front lines back to the fire direction centers. No more vulnerable telephone wires that could be cut by artillery fire. No more delays in calling for fire support. The FDC teams had been trained to work with almost mechanical precision. Multiple officers would simultaneously calculate different aspects of the firing solution, cross-checking each other's work. They could process a fire mission in minutes that would have taken other armies hours. But the real secret weapon was standardization. While Germany deployed a chaotic mix of artillery pieces, many of them captured French, Russian, or Czech guns, with different ammunition and firing characteristics. America had standardized on just a few types of weapons. Every American artillery battalion knew exactly what they were firing, had abundant ammunition, and could coordinate seamlessly. The result was a system where an American division could, within 9 minutes, coordinate the fire of every artillery piece in an entire corps. Hundreds of guns, spread across dozens of miles, all firing as one. Let's put you in the boots of a German soldier in late 1944. You're part of a Panzer Grenadier regiment advancing through a French village. Your officers have assured you that American infantry can't stop experienced German troops. You've been told that American soldiers are soft, that they rely on overwhelming material superiority because they lack the fighting spirit of the Wehrmacht. It's late afternoon. Your unit is moving through open farmland toward a wooded area that intelligence says is lightly defended. You're with about 200 men, vehicles spread out across several hundred yards. Then, without any warning at all, the world explodes. Not a whistling sound building to a crescendo, not the distant crump of artillery fire getting closer, just instant devastation. 20, 30, 40 shells, all detonating within a 3-second window. High explosive rounds, white phosphorus, air bursts. The entire area your unit occupies becomes a killing zone in less time than it takes to process what's happening. Those first few seconds are catastrophic. Men caught in the open are shredded by shrapnel. Vehicles are blown apart. The shockwave alone is enough to rupture organs and eardrums. And then, before anyone can even begin to respond, a second time-on-target barrage arrives, and sometimes a third. This is what German forces experienced again and again, especially during the Battle of the Bulge. American artillery units would fire 20 TOT missions in a single night, keeping German troops constantly suppressed, constantly off balance. The sophistication of it was terrifying. An American Fire Direction Center could receive coordinates for multiple targets, calculate solutions for all of them, and then sequence the fires so that Target A was hit, followed 3 minutes later by Target B, then Target C. with each strike being a perfectly synchronized time-on-target mission involving dozens of guns. German prisoners of war, interrogated after battles, consistently remarked on the speed and accuracy of American artillery. Some refused to believe it was even possible. How could guns that were miles apart, that couldn't even see each other, fire as though controlled by a single hand? The German military had always prided itself on tactical and technological superiority. They had pioneered blitzkrieg tactics, created some of the most effective tanks in the world, and developed advanced weapons like jet aircraft and ballistic missiles. But in artillery coordination, they were decades behind. German artillery was largely horse-drawn until 1943. Their fire direction was decentralized, with individual batteries operating semi-independently. They had nothing resembling the American Fire Direction Center system, and perhaps most critically, their artillery couldn't keep up with their own panzer divisions during rapid advances. When the Wehrmacht invaded France in 1940, the speed of their advance often left their artillery far behind. But they won anyway, through superior tactics and French military collapse. They became convinced that mobility and armor were everything, that artillery was a supporting element at best. Then they met the American system. During the Battle of the Bulge, the German offensive initially succeeded because of surprise and bad weather that grounded Allied air power. But American artillery, operating in appalling conditions, became the primary weapon stopping the German advance. At Elsenborn Ridge, the U.S. Army assembled almost 350 guns, one of the largest artillery concentrations in the history of warfare. The Sixth SS Panzer Army literally ran into what soldiers described as a wall of steel. German after-action reports from the Bulge are filled with references to the devastating effectiveness of American artillery. One captured document described American fire as arriving with shattering speed and accuracy. Generals accustomed to the methodical, predictable patterns of artillery warfare found themselves facing something they had no doctrine to counter. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, fighting American forces in North Africa, had written to his wife in February 1943 about his grudging respect for American artillery. He described observation planes directing fire from numerous batteries on all worthwhile targets throughout the zone. This was early in American involvement, and already Rommel recognized something disturbing. The Americans had industrialized artillery warfare. What makes the American artillery revolution even more remarkable is that it was developed during peacetime by officers who had never commanded in modern warfare. Carlos Brewer, Leslie McNair, Jacob Devers, Orlando Ward. These were the men who, working in the 1,930 seconds at Fort Sill, created the doctrines and systems that would dominate World War II. They were responding to the lessons of World War I, where artillery had been powerful but inefficient. They recognized that modern warfare would be more mobile, more fluid, and that artillery needed to be able to respond instantly to rapidly changing situations. But they also recognized something deeper, that industrial America's greatest strength was standardization, mass production, and systems engineering. They couldn't necessarily make better individual artillery pieces than Germany. The German 88mm gun was legendary for a reason, but they could create a system where dozens, even hundreds of guns, worked together with the precision of a Swiss watch. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This philosophy extended beyond just fire coordination. American artillery battalions were fully motorized by 1941. They used trucks and tractors, not horses. An American heavy artillery battalion could road march 160 miles in a single day under favorable conditions. German horse-drawn artillery was lucky to make 20 miles. American artillery also had abundant ammunition. While German forces often had to conserve shells, American units could fire 20, 30, 40 TOT missions in a single night if needed. The industrial might of the United States, the ability to produce millions of shells and transport them to Europe, meant that American artillery could fight at an operational tempo the Germans simply could not match. Here's what truly shocked the German generals. They had underestimated American technical capability. Nazi propaganda had painted Americans as culturally inferior, as soft civilians who could never match German military prowess. Even German generals, who should have known better, believed that American equipment would be inferior to German engineering. They were spectacularly wrong. American artillery wasn't just good. In terms of fire coordination, it was the best in the world, and it wasn't even close. The British had developed the concept of time on target, but lacked the standardization and resources to implement it on the American scale. The Soviets had massive artillery parks, but their fire control was crude by comparison. The Germans had excellent individual weapons, but couldn't coordinate fires like the Americans. There's a telling anecdote from the memoir My War by Dr. Don Fussler. His unit had been troubled by German artillery fire that seemed suspiciously accurate. They discovered that a German captain had been left behind with a radio, directing fire on American positions. When he was captured, they found a map showing all the German artillery positions in the area. The map was immediately sent to Division Artillery, which conducted a simultaneous time-on-target shoot on all of the German positions at once. Think about that for a moment. Multiple American artillery battalions, firing on multiple targets spread across several miles, all shells arriving simultaneously at each target location. The level of coordination required was extraordinary, and as the account specifically notes, no other artillery in the world could have done that at that time. This wasn't propaganda. This wasn't American exaggeration. This was the simple reality of technical and organizational superiority in one specific domain of warfare. Technology alone doesn't win wars. The American artillery system worked because of the men who operated it and the training they received. American artillery crews trained obsessively on their fire direction center procedures. They drilled on radio communication, on calculating firing solutions, on the choreography of coordinating multiple batteries. They practiced until the process became second nature. Forward observers were specially trained to work closely with infantry units, to understand the flow of battle, to anticipate when and where artillery support would be needed. They learned to call for fire quickly and accurately, understanding that the speed of American response time was one of their greatest advantages. The gun crews themselves were trained to fire rapidly and accurately. American doctrine emphasized sustaining high rates of fire for extended periods. Crews could maintain 4 to 5 rounds per minute per gun for hours if necessary, something that would exhaust crews trained in more leisurely firing practices. But perhaps most importantly, American artillery units believed in their system. They had confidence that when they called for fire, it would arrive quickly and accurately. That confidence translated into aggressive, effective use of artillery throughout the campaign in Europe. The American artillery advantage had effects far beyond individual battles. It shaped German strategic calculations and limited their options. During the Battle of the Bulge, for example, the German plan relied on achieving strategic objectives quickly, before American artillery could properly organize a response. But American units, even when surprised and surrounded, immediately began coordinating artillery fires. The legendary defense of Bastogne was possible in large part because American artillery kept German forces at bay until relief arrived. The density of American artillery fire also forced German units to disperse more than they wanted to. Concentrating forces for an attack risked devastating TOT strikes. This dispersion, in turn, made German attacks less effective and coordination more difficult. German commanders found that the rapid response time of American artillery made traditional tactics dangerous. The classic German infantry assault, where troops would concentrate, attack, and overrun a position, became an invitation for the catastrophic casualties. American forward observers could call in devastating fire missions within minutes. This fundamentally altered the tactical balance on the Western Front. German advantages in infantry tactics and small unit leadership were negated by American ability to blanket any concentration of enemy forces with synchronized artillery fire. Here's the deep irony of the story. American artillery supremacy was achieved using principles that Germany had, in some ways, pioneered. German military thinking had always emphasized the importance of combined arms warfare, of different elements of an army working together seamlessly. German tactical doctrine stressed coordinated fire and maneuver. These were concepts the German military understood intellectually, but America actually implemented them at scale, using industrial methods and systematic training to create an artillery system that embodied these principles more effectively than Germany ever had. It was a perfect example of American military culture, taking theoretical concepts, engineering them into practical systems, training masses of soldiers to execute those systems efficiently, and then producing the equipment and ammunition needed to sustain operations indefinitely. German generals, schooled in a military tradition that valued individual brilliance and tactical artistry, found themselves outmatched by American systematic efficiency. This wasn't supposed to happen. In the Nazi worldview, the racially superior German soldier, led by professional officers from a proud military tradition, should naturally defeat American civilians in uniform. Instead, those American civilians had created an artillery system that German professionals couldn't counter, built on principles of mathematical precision, industrial standardization, and organizational efficiency that reflected American culture and capabilities. The American artillery system developed in World War II became the template for modern artillery operations around the world. After the war, armies globally studied American Fire Direction Center procedures and time-on-target techniques. The fundamental principles remain relevant today. Centralized coordination, standardized equipment, rapid communication, and precise timing. Modern artillery, with computer-aided fire control systems and GPS-guided munitions, is doing the same things that World War II American artillery did, just faster and with greater precision. The concept of massing fires from dispersed positions, of treating multiple batteries as a single weapon system, and of coordinating fires to achieve simultaneous impact, all of these originated or were perfected by the US Army in the 1,930 seconds and 1,940 seconds. Today, modern artillery can fire even more precisely, with even better coordination. But the shock that German generals felt in 1944 when they experienced time on target for the first time was the shock of encountering a fundamentally new way of using an ancient weapon. They had expected American material superiority. They hadn't expected American technical and organizational superiority. They certainly hadn't expected to face an artillery system that was not just better than theirs, but operating on entirely different principles. The story of American artillery in World War II carries a lesson that extends beyond military history. It's about the danger of underestimating your opponent, particularly when your assessment is based on prejudice rather than evidence. German generals looked at American soldiers and saw wealthy amateurs, citizens who had been drafted to fight a war they didn't understand. They saw an army that couldn't possibly match the professionalism and tactical skill of the Wehrmacht. What they missed was that warfare had evolved beyond individual tactical brilliance. Modern industrial warfare favored systems, logistics, standardization, and scale, areas where American organizational culture excelled. The American artillery system was quintessentially American in its approach. Standardized equipment, mass-produced in vast quantities, systematic training applied to large numbers of soldiers, mathematical precision replacing intuitive artistry, centralized coordination, enabling dispersed execution. When German generals muttered, "This isn't war," they were partly right. It wasn't war as they understood it, war as it had been fought for centuries. It was industrial warfare, systematic and coordinated, powered by American technical capabilities and organizational culture. In the winter of 1944, in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, German generals learned a hard truth. The American army they had dismissed as inexperienced and soft had mastered a dimension of warfare that Germany had neglected. 20 guns, firing as one, with shells converging from different directions to arrive at precisely the same instant. This was the face of modern artillery warfare. It was devastating, it was precise, and in 1944, only one army in the world could do it. The fire direction centers, the carefully calculated firing sequences, the reliable radios and abundant ammunition, the systematic training that turned farm boys and factory workers into precise components of a devastating machine. All of it came together to create American artillery supremacy. German prisoners of war, captured after experiencing American TOT strikes, often expressed shock and disbelief. Some thought they had been hit by airstrikes because the concentration of fire was so intense. Others couldn't believe that guns miles apart could be coordinated with such precision, but they had experienced it, and so had every German unit that faced American forces in 1944 and 1945. The revolutionary system developed by Carlos Brewer and his colleagues at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, had fundamentally changed the nature of artillery warfare. When German generals said, "This isn't war," they were witnessing the future of military conflict, systematic, coordinated, leveraging technology and training to achieve effects that would have been impossible just a generation earlier. American artillery didn't just outmatch German artillery, it operated on a completely different level of coordination and effectiveness. And that difference, multiplied across dozens of battles and hundreds of engagements, helped determine the outcome of the war in Western Europe. This is the story of how American ingenuity transformed an ancient weapon into a precision instrument, how industrial methods revolutionized military operations, and how German generals learned, too late, that warfare had changed in ways they never anticipated. 20 guns, firing as one, time on target. A revolution in artillery warfare that shocked the world and helped win a war. The impact of American artillery supremacy wasn't theoretical. It manifested in specific battles, where the outcome hinged on the ability to mass fires with unprecedented speed and accuracy. Let's examine several key engagements where German forces learned, sometimes repeatedly, that American artillery was unlike anything they had faced before. In August 1944, Hitler ordered a massive counteroffensive at Mortagne, France. The plan was ambitious. German armoured divisions would drive west to the coast, cutting off the American breakthrough and trapping Patton's Third Army. It was a classic German operational concept, bold and potentially devastating. What Hitler and his generals didn't fully account for was American artillery. The attack began before dawn on August 7th. German Panzer divisions initially made progress, overwhelming surprised American positions. But within hours, American artillery had organized a devastating response. Forward observers, many of them isolated with surrounded infantry units, continued calling in fire missions with deadly accuracy. The 30th Infantry Division, bearing the brunt of the German assault, was supported by every artillery battalion within range. The fire direction centers coordinated fires across division, corps, and even army boundaries. German columns, trying to exploit their initial breakthrough, found themselves hammered by converging artillery fire from multiple directions. One German regimental commander, captured after the battle, reported that his unit had been hit by what he estimated to be over 40 time-on-target missions in a single day. He described it as the most concentrated artillery fire he had experienced in 5 years of warfare, including the Eastern Front. The American response at Mortagne wasn't just about having more guns, it was about being able to shift fires rapidly from one target to another, to mass overwhelming firepower at critical points, and to maintain that pressure continuously. German commanders found that whenever they concentrated forces for an attack, American artillery would appear within minutes. The counteroffensive failed. Hitler's last realistic chance to salvage the situation in France evaporated under American artillery fire, and German generals began to understand that they were facing an artillery system they simply couldn't match. The Battle of Hürtgen Forest, fought from September to December 1944, was one of the longest and bloodiest battles the US Army fought in Europe. The dense forest terrain seemed to favor the defender, and German forces used it skillfully. But American artillery, even in this challenging environment, proved decisive. The forest canopy made airstrikes difficult and negated much of the American air superiority. German bunkers and fortifications were expertly camouflaged. It should have been the perfect defensive terrain, but American artillery crews learned to use tree bursts to their advantage. By setting fuses to detonate shells in the forest canopy above German positions, American artillery created deadly airbursts that sprayed shrapnel downward. Trenches and foxholes that would have provided protection against ground bursts became death traps. White phosphorus rounds turned the forest itself into a weapon, with burning trees and undergrowth driving German defenders from their positions. The fire direction centers became so efficient that infantry companies could call for fire missions and have shells landing on target within 3 to 5 minutes. This rapid response time was crucial in the close-quarters fighting. When German counterattacks developed, American artillery could break them up before they built momentum. One German battalion commander, interrogated after being captured, admitted that his unit had suffered more casualties from American artillery in Hürtgen Forest than from any other cause. He described the psychological impact of knowing that American shells could arrive anywhere, anytime, with minimal warning. When the time came to cross the Rhine River in March 1945, American commanders knew they faced one of the most difficult operations in warfare. An opposed river crossing against a determined enemy. Artillery would be crucial. The preparation for the crossing at Remagen and later at other points along the Rhine showcased the full sophistication of American artillery doctrine. Forward observers had mapped every German position along the eastern bank. The fire direction centers had prepared firing solutions for hundreds of targets. The ammunition had been stockpiled in quantities that would have been unimaginable to German forces. When the crossings began, American artillery laid down barrages that German survivors described as apocalyptic, but this wasn't just indiscriminate bombardment. It was precisely coordinated fire, designed to suppress specific German defensive positions at exact times corresponding to the river crossing schedule. As American infantry crossed in boats, artillery fire walked ahead of them, targeting German machine gun nests and mortar positions. When German reserves moved to counterattack, they were hammered by time-on-target missions before they could reach the river. When bridging equipment began arriving, artillery created a protective umbrella that made German artillery counter-battery fire suicidal. The sophistication of the coordination was extraordinary. Artillery units on the western bank were firing in coordination with units that had already crossed. Forward observers were radioing back targets even as they came across in the initial waves. The fire direction centers were processing dozens of simultaneous fire missions, prioritizing targets, allocating guns, and ensuring that every German attempt to interfere with the crossing was met with overwhelming firepower. General Hans von Luck, a highly experienced German commander, later wrote about the Rhine crossings. He noted that German artillery tried to respond, but was systematically destroyed by American counter-battery fire. American artillery spotter planes and rapid-fire direction meant that any German gun that fired immediately became a target itself. The German artillery was silenced not because they lacked guns or ammunition, but because they couldn't survive in the American fire environment. Beyond the physical destruction, American artillery had a profound psychological impact on German forces. This aspect is often overlooked in purely tactical analyses, but it was crucial to understanding why German units that had fought tenaciously on the Eastern Front sometimes collapsed when facing American firepower. German soldiers had experienced heavy artillery bombardment on the Eastern Front. Soviet artillery, while less sophisticated in fire control, was used in massive quantities. German troops had learned to endure Soviet barrages. But American artillery was different in ways that created unique psychological pressures. The precision and speed of American artillery created a sense of vulnerability that was hard to overcome. On the Eastern Front, German soldiers knew that Soviet artillery barrages followed predictable patterns. There would be a preparation, a rolling barrage, then an infantry assault. You could anticipate it, prepare for it, survive it. American time-on-target strikes came without warning. One moment, everything was normal. The next moment, the world exploded. There was no time to prepare mentally, no graduated warning, no chance to brace yourself. And then, before you could recover, another tot mission would arrive, and sometimes a third. German soldiers began to develop what we would now recognize as symptoms of combat stress, specifically related to American artillery. The constant, unpredictable threat of instant annihilation from fire that could arrive anywhere, anytime, created chronic anxiety that ground down even veteran troops. Letters captured from German soldiers frequently mentioned American artillery with a mixture of respect and fear. One soldier wrote to his family that he would rather face a tank assault than another day under American artillery fire. Another described feeling hunted by artillery that seemed to follow his unit everywhere. The psychological impact extended to German commanders. They found themselves constrained in ways they hadn't experienced before. Concentrating forces for an attack risked devastating casualties before the attack even began. Moving reserves forward in daylight was suicide. Even command posts had to be constantly relocated because American counter-battery fire was so quick and accurate. This psychological dimension interacted with the physical casualties to create a compounding effect. Units that might have held their positions despite casualties found that the mental strain of constant American artillery made coherent defense difficult. Men who would have stood their ground in other circumstances found themselves breaking when yet another perfectly coordinated tot strike landed on their position. One aspect of American artillery superiority that often gets overlooked is the sheer logistics achievement required to sustain it. The American artillery system didn't just need sophisticated fire control. It needed millions of shells, thousands of vehicles, and a supply chain that could keep guns firing at unprecedented rates. Consider the numbers. During the Battle of the Bulge, American artillery units fired over 350,000 shells in the first 2 weeks of fighting. That's not counting mortar rounds or small arms ammunition, just artillery shells. Each 105mm shell weighed about 33 pounds. Each 155mm shell weighed around 95 pounds. The larger 8-inch shells weighed 200 pounds each. This meant that hundreds of thousands of tons of ammunition had to be transported from ports in France and Belgium to artillery positions along the front, often in terrible winter weather over damaged roads. And this was happening while simultaneously supplying food, fuel, replacement equipment, and everything else an army needs. The U.S. Army had created a logistics system specifically designed to sustain high-intensity artillery operations. Ammunition supply points were positioned to ensure that artillery battalions never ran out of shells. Trucks ran continuously, often under artillery fire themselves, to keep the guns supplied. German forces, by contrast, were constantly short of ammunition. German artillery commanders had to carefully husband their shells, rationing fire missions because they never knew when more ammunition would arrive. This created a vicious cycle. Limited ammunition meant less effective fire support, which meant infantry attacks failed more often, which meant more defensive positions had to be held, which required more artillery support that couldn't be provided. The American logistics system also meant that damaged artillery pieces could be quickly repaired or replaced. If a gun barrel wore out from sustained firing, a replacement could be installed within hours. If a towing vehicle broke down, another could be brought up. German artillery units often had to operate with worn barrels and broken equipment, because replacements simply weren't available. This logistics dimension was as important as the fire direction centers or the time-on-target technique. Without the ability to sustain high rates of fire indefinitely, the American artillery system would have been just a theoretical advantage. But because the logistics worked, because the shells kept coming and the guns kept firing, American artillery could maintain operational pressure that German forces simply couldn't withstand over time. Another revolutionary aspect of American artillery in World War II was how it integrated with intelligence gathering and processing. The fire direction center system wasn't just about calculating firing solutions. It was about rapid collection, analysis, and response to battlefield information. American forward observers were trained not just to call for fire, but to gather intelligence. They reported German movements, identified unit insignia, estimated enemy strength, and noted changes in German defensive positions. This information flowed back to intelligence sections that built detailed pictures of German deployments. When prisoners of war were interrogated, information about German artillery positions, ammunition dumps, and command posts was immediately passed to artillery units. The captured map mentioned earlier, showing German artillery positions, wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic process of turning intelligence into targeting information. American artillery also benefited from air reconnaissance. Photographic intelligence from aircraft would identify German positions, which would be marked on maps and assigned target numbers. When those positions became active, they could be immediately engaged with precisely calculated fires. The integration went the other way too. American artillery fire missions generated intelligence. When German units responded to being hit, their radio traffic was intercepted. When they moved, they were spotted. The fire direction centers became nodes in a larger information network that made American artillery increasingly effective as the campaign progressed. German forces, lacking equivalent radio capabilities and systematic intelligence integration, found themselves at a severe disadvantage. They might know generally where American forces were, but they couldn't develop the detailed targeting information that would allow for effective counter-battery fire. Their artillery would fire on suspected American positions, often hitting nothing, while American artillery was hitting known German positions with devastating accuracy. This intelligence integration also meant that American artillery could adapt quickly to German tactics. When German forces began dispersing more to reduce vulnerability to TOT strikes, American artillery shifted to firing wider patterns with variable fuses. When Germans concentrated at night to avoid observation, American artillery increased harassing fire during darkness. The system learned and evolved continuously. One of the most important, yet least discussed aspects of artillery warfare is counter-battery fire, using artillery to destroy enemy artillery. American supremacy in this dimension of the battle was total and decisive. Counter-battery fire is technically challenging. You need to locate enemy guns, calculate their position accurately, and fire on them before they can move. German artillery, following traditional doctrine, would fire a mission and then often relocate to avoid counter-battery fire. This had worked reasonably well against other armies. It didn't work against American artillery. American forward observers, often flying in light aircraft, could spot German muzzle flashes even from miles away. They would immediately radio coordinates to fire direction centers. Within minutes, American shells would be landing on the German gun positions. This response time was so fast that German artillery crews often couldn't complete their relocation before American counter-battery fire arrived. The American system for counter-battery fire was particularly sophisticated. Flash ranging and sound ranging units, using triangulation from multiple observation points, could locate German guns with precision. This information would be processed rapidly, and firing solutions calculated for multiple American batteries to engage simultaneously. German artillery found itself in an impossible situation. If they fired to support their infantry, they immediately drew devastating counter-battery fire. If they didn't fire, their infantry lacked artillery support. Many German artillery commanders chose to preserve their guns by firing minimally, which meant German infantry attacks often went forward without adequate fire support. The effect was cumulative. As German artillery was systematically suppressed and destroyed, German infantry became more vulnerable to American artillery. This created a spiral of artillery dominance where American guns could fire more freely because they faced less counter-battery threat, while German guns fired less because they faced overwhelming counter-battery response. By early 1945, in many sectors of the Western Front, German artillery had been effectively neutralized as an offensive weapon. It could engage emergency targets to prevent immediate breakthroughs, but sustained fire support for German operations had become nearly impossible. Given that German engineers and military theorists were generally quite sophisticated, the obvious question is, why couldn't Germany develop an equivalent system? The answer reveals important truths about industrial warfare. First, Germany lacked the industrial base to standardize artillery. Between captured weapons, weapons from different periods, and weapons from different manufacturers, German artillery was a logistical nightmare. Creating a unified fire control system for this mishmash of equipment would have been nearly impossible. Second, Germany's military culture emphasized decentralized command. German doctrine gave battalion and even battery commanders significant autonomy. The American system, by contrast, worked through centralized coordination. Adopting American methods would have required fundamental changes to German military culture. Third, and perhaps most importantly, by the time German commanders fully understood what they were facing, it was too late. Developing an equivalent system would have required years of doctrinal development, training, and equipment production. Germany, in 1944 to 1945, didn't have years. They didn't even have months. The German military did attempt some responses. They increased emphasis on camouflage and dispersal. They tried to adopt more rapid displacement tactics for artillery. They experimented with predicted fire that didn't require ranging shots, but these were tactical adjustments to a fundamental systemic disadvantage. Some German officers, after the war, argued that if they had understood American artillery capabilities earlier, they might have developed counters. But this misses the point. The American system wasn't just a technical achievement. It was the product of American industrial capacity, systematic training, and organizational culture. Germany couldn't have replicated it without essentially transforming into a different country. When World War II ended, armies around the world studied what had happened. The lessons were clear. American artillery doctrine represented the future of the arm. The Soviet Union, which had relied on massed artillery fires with less sophisticated fire control, began adopting American-style fire direction center concepts. NATO allies trained on American artillery doctrine. Even former enemies recognized that American methods represented a fundamental advance in the art of artillery warfare. The principles developed at Fort Sill in the 1932nd became the foundation for modern artillery operations. Centralized fire control, rapid processing of fire missions, standardized equipment, integrated communications. All of these remain central to artillery doctrine worldwide. Modern artillery, with its GPS guidance, computerized fire control, and satellite communications, operates at speeds and with precision that would have seemed like science fiction in 1944. But the fundamental concepts remain the same. Multiple batteries, coordinated through centralized fire direction, engaging targets with precisely timed fires to achieve overwhelming effects. The German generals who said this isn't war were, in a sense, correct. What they were witnessing was a new form of warfare, one where industrial systems and mathematical precision trumped traditional military virtues. They were witnessing the birth of modern artillery warfare, and they were on the wrong side of that revolution. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.